Welcome, Walnut. I'm Lara, but you can call me Laz, your host for Walnut Wednesday. This is your reminder to be brave, be yourself, and know that you can make the world a better place just by what you decide today. Here, I'm going to share my weekly walnuttings with you on a Wednesday. Hello, Walnut. It is me, Laz, here for another episode of Walnut Wednesday. And I have a very brave, beautiful, wonderful guest this week. And we're going to talk all about birth stories because Jess here has a good handful. Jess McKenzie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have a chat, ask you lots of questions, obviously from my experience as well, and hear all about yours. But before we do, Jess, please can I get you to introduce yourself to the Walnuts who have not met you before?
Yep, sweet. So I'm Jess. I am a mid-thirties mum of three boys. We used to live in Wellington and a couple of years ago moved up to the Hawke's Bay. So we live in a little rural town. And we are a homeschooling family. I'm an ex-ECE teacher. But yeah, so my life is full of three boys and chickens and cats and dog. Um, yeah, so
I
that's
love
pretty
that.
that's me.
I love that. I love that. And I'm really, really intrigued to hear about like homeschooling and I love the idea of rural living with the chickens and the and your family and all the things. Like I feel like that feels just so wholesome. And just quickly a question, have you found that since you moved from like the big smoky Wellington, not since it's not actually that smoky, is it? I just called it the big smoke. But since you moved from the city or from Wellington area
Yeah.
to something when I think of Hawke's Bay, I just think of wine country and long, luscious grass. But do you find that it helped like regulate your nervous system a little bit just to be like
So
rural, homeschooling, not living off the land, but like having your own stuff and make, like
yeah, it was definitely like that for us. And like because we've still got family down in Kapiti in Wellington, when we go down and visit, nervous system just like kicks off again, and it's like
Mhm.
overstimulation central of like even just how many cars are on the road.
Yeah.
Like, because up here, our traffic jam is often when sheep and cattle are crossing the road or there's roadworks or something, and that's it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was definitely very centering for us. Part of the reason we moved rurally was knowing that we wanted different for our kids. We had kind of an introduction to it. We lived in Karori in a converted wool shed on a farm, on the outskirts.
Mhm.
And that was sort of our introduction to the kids having a backyard. And then the farmer who owned the property sold his property. And so we were like starting to look at rentals, and we were just like, there was nothing that fitted and felt good. We were just about to have our second son. And we were just like, if we get a house in town or whatever, I'm going to have to go straight back to work because we're not going to be able to afford for both of us, like for me to be off for a year or whatever. So it was partially financial decision to move rural, but also partially because we enjoy it up here. We've got friends that live up here and they actually own the house that we live in. So yeah, so it kind of just, we came up for a weekend when I was heavily pregnant, and we were just like, it was COVID, I think level 4 was just about to hit again. And we were just like, let's just pull the trigger, we'll do it. And we moved here and yeah, haven't really looked back. And it's been like, yeah, really, really good for my nervous system, really good for the kids, like being able to play in the backyard. We wake up in the morning and they just have breakfast and often they're straight outside. Um, yeah, so just things like that have really been great for us, but so scary at the same time because we were moving away from our whole support system, and having to like make new connections in a small town can be hard. Um, there's not much set up in terms of support out here, like,
Mhm.
but we've just in the last year connected with our local play centre and stuff like that, and we've made connections that way, which has been really lovely, and
Yeah.
met lots of like-minded people who also are craving a slower life and all that sort of stuff, which has been really cool.
Oh, I like have actual chills. I don't know, because I just like feel, I don't know, that made me feel all sorts of feelings. Just like I think that I, like the other people that you're connecting with, do crave that like slower life. And I'm in the phase of like starting to think like, oh shit, I have to go back to work soon and I don't want to. And it's not like a I don't want to go to work and like the grind and all that. It's
Yeah,
actually just like you say, go have breakfast, go straight outside, and like just that relaxed feel
yeah,
about everything. And obviously my work is in the city in Wellington, so yeah, it's just there's so many mental layers that come along with it. So like, I'm just so proud of you. We could have a whole other podcast. Maybe you need to come back for round two already, but we could have a whole episode on like the moving and the and how brave and scary that is. But
yeah.
Jess, I'd love to talk. So you've got three boys. I have been really intrigued, obviously, since I had the experience myself of a birth story. And
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions from some walnuts who have, yeah, questions about birth stories and things. How do you want to tell this? Do you want to just fire away with one, two, three and how we get on, or
I guess so. That might actually be the easiest.
yeah? Okay.
Um, yeah, so I guess I had three very different pregnancies and births, like very, very different. So our first, so we, I guess, kind of not struggled, but we had been off birth control for about a year and a half before my eldest was conceived.
Yeah.
And we actually had a loss just before him.
Oh,
Um, so it was a slow start, but then once I was pregnant with him, it kind of all fell together. But yeah, so I had with my eldest, I had what's called SPD. I developed pubic symphysis, which is like it feels like your pelvis is pretty much broken from about the 28-week mark. So I ended up having to leave work early and I was in agony. And so it was a really slow, restful end of my pregnancy,
yeah.
which was looking back now, I'm grateful that I had that at the time. It sucked, but looking back now, knowing how, intense motherhood is and how big the initiation is into having babies,
Mm,
I'm so grateful that I had that time to just be slow and be still and rest and nourish my body in all the ways that I needed to nourish it and all that sort of stuff. Because once you're in, it's like there is nothing that can prepare you, no matter how many people talk to you about things, how many books you read, how many things you listen to. Every mother's experience is central to her.
yeah.
Everyone's so different, and I truly believe that we're sent the children that we're meant to have. And for our souls, you know, what's it called? Like soul's journey or whatever,
Yeah.
for your evolution. But yeah, with my first, I was real like I'd heard such awful experiences. Like everyone around me at work, even family members, friends were like, "Oh, it's awful, and this happened, and that happened," and um, so I went in with like a sense of fear, but I didn't want to be fearful because I sort of had higher hopes, I guess,
Yeah.
and um, so I went in with the plan of hoping for we set up with the birthing centre in Lower Hutt, and I had a beautiful midwife who ended up doing two of my pregnancies and births, and she was amazing, and I loved her a lot, and we got quite close. But yeah, so I birthed in the birthing centre in Lower Hutt, and I've managed to have a drug-free water birth. And so like I was so like it was the most proud I'd ever been of myself for anything. Like everything paled in comparison. Like getting a degree and all that. I was like, that was hard, but holy heck, I just birthed a baby. Yeah, it was for a first experience, I was very lucky. And then but I felt almost like a sense of shame of telling people how much I enjoyed giving birth.
Mm,
Um, like of course it's hard and it wasn't comfortable and very painful and all that sort of stuff, but I was so proud of the fact that I'd done something that I wasn't sure I'd be able to do.
yeah.
But yeah, I felt a real sense of shame about it, and so I didn't often talk to people about my birth, and it wasn't until I was further in motherhood that when people would ask me, I'd actually be like, I'm so proud of myself. I managed to have a drug-free water birth. It was the most beautiful experience. The room, looking back now though, I'm like, I'm glad that we did it the way that we did it, but like it was a initiation. Like there
Yeah.
was my midwife wasn't there. It was our backup midwife. She was my main midwife was on a course that day, and so she turned up like 10 minutes after he was born, and she was like, "No, I missed it." But the midwife that we had was great, and but my mum was there, my two sisters, my partner, so there was just
Wow.
people, so many people in the room, and within like I had retained placenta after he was born. I think my body went into shock
Yeah.
because I was like, oh my God, this massive thing just happened. And it got to like, it had been an hour post his birth, and my midwife, I could tell, was starting to like get a bit panicky, but the placenta hadn't come yet. And so she was getting me onto all these different positions to try and like move it out normally. And then she ended up giving me an injection in my thigh, I think oxytocin or something injection. And after that, it came. But like, yeah, within an hour of his birth, that happened. My father-in-law turned up. We had other people visit us like an hour later. And like at the time it was fine, but looking back, I'm like, how was I not like flipping out? That was so intense. But
Wow. That is a lot of people to have in the
yeah,
room, right? Oh my gosh.
yeah, and like there was still like obviously blood everywhere.
Uh, you got
And
to
I
have the
was just like,
shower. You got to do that. You got to do the showering. They got to
yeah,
like weigh the baby. They got to. I
yeah, I
barely
was
remember
like
those bits.
nude. I was like, this is intense. This feels like a real invasion of privacy almost. But at the same time, I'm like glad because so many people were so excited for his birth and all that sort of stuff. And so
Yeah.
like my mum and my sisters especially got to experience, yeah, something that they weren't sure that they'd ever get a chance to do. So that was really cool. Um, but yeah, and yeah, then so that was him. And then
Yeah.
with my second, he was my eldest was almost 2.5, 2 and 3 quarters, like almost three. Um, and but just before his brother was born. And then it was COVID. And so like with my first, I had lots of support postpartum. Like my mum and my sisters were popping in every few days. Mum was a shift worker at the hospital, and so she would, pop in after her shift and help me with housework and hold the baby while I showered and all that nourishy mum stuff that, you hope to be lucky enough to do for your kids. So
Mm.
my experience postpartum with him was beautiful, and I was so grateful. And where we lived, there was like a beautiful river walk just by our house. And so most days for the first like year and a half of his life, it was just me and him, and we'd just breastfeed and then hop in the pram and go for walks. And, it was like a dreamy postpartum. But with my second, it was like I'd gone back to work. Um, my second pregnancy, I was like, my biggest thing was that I was exhausted all the time. Like
Yeah.
exhaustion was like through the roof, and I could
Yeah.
fall asleep anywhere. Like I was an early childhood teacher in Wellington, and I would put in the sleep room, putting kids to sleep, struggling to keep my eyes open.
Yeah.
And just like bone tired, but I didn't have the same pelvic pain this time because that was one of the biggest concerns. Like when we talked about having a second, is I was like, that pelvic pain that I had was awful, and I hope that I don't have it this time. But I was lucky that I didn't. But yeah, it was the fatigue, and then when it came to his birth, um, we were in COVID. I think they knew that it was ramping up again. Like it had the period at the start that it was massive when my oldest was younger. And then as we got closer to, yeah, having the second, it was ramping up again, and we were nervous. And so I made some decisions that I wish now that I hadn't have made, but I was scared. And like so we had our full term appointment with my midwife the day before level 4 hit off.
Oh
And
wow.
she was like, oh, I can do a stretch and sweep if you want me to. Because I was like, I'm really concerned that, I'm going to go over again. Because I think, almost 41 weeks with my first. and I didn't want to be in hospital. I wanted to birth in the birthing center again and all that sort of stuff. And so I was like, yeah, okay, stretch and sweep me, absolutely. But
Sorry,
I
Jess,
really,
just to interrupt, can you just explain the stretch and sweep? That's a form of what's it called, what do they call it? Not intervention. Yeah, intervention.
um,
Can you just explain
yeah,
what
it
that
is.
kind of is for a walnut who's like, what the fuck?
Oh
Like,
yeah, yeah. So stretch and sweep. My understanding is that they insert fingers into your cervix and sweep part of the membranes, like do a little bit of a
move.
maneuver to sweep part of the membranes away to encourage the cervix to start doing its job dilating.
Yeah.
Um, some people have like can have them and have nothing happen. But often it's something that they offer when you start getting towards like the 41-week mark or what have you, because they know a lot of people want to avoid going into hospital and doing the whole induction thing because that
Mm.
can be quite intense in other ways too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Thank
I
you.
think that yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they do. But yeah, and so I agreed to that happening. And then I got home and I'm in early labor, but it was like stop starty. So like the contractions would really ramp up and I'd be like on my hands and knees and like doing cat cow and trying to get myself into comfortable positions and stuff. But then it would peter off again for like they'd start getting a rhythm of being like 10 minutes apart and then they'd peter off again. Um, so I did that all night and into the next day. And my younger sister was training to be a midwife at the time. But we had that night after I'd had the stretch and sweep, we got notification that level 4 was happening again and that it would be from the next morning. And so I was like, oh, okay, why did I do this? This was not a good idea. Because, yeah, my labour was picking up again. And so my sister came out from Kapiti into Karori where we were living. And because she was planning on staying there with my eldest, while me and my partner went to the birthing centre to meet up with the midwife to see if I was dilating. But she got there. My partner had a cold. My son had a cold. And he was like, hey, I don't want to get all the way out to the birthing centre with you and then them tell me that I can't be there because we weren't sure what the rules were going to be. Because, like, when we
Yeah.
got to the birthing centre, they were taking our temperatures and asking if we had, you know, any
Sim-
symptoms, any cold and flu symptoms, and all that sort of stuff. And so the decision was made just as we were packing the car that my sister would come with me instead. And so that felt like a thing as well.
Yeah.
Um, like I was grateful that she came and she was an amazing person to have on my side. But yeah, from then it kind of just unraveled. We
Yeah.
got to the birthing centre and it was just like the experience could not have been more different to my eldest. We got there, we were lucky to have the same room. There was no other families there at the time. I think it was like a 12 room birthing centre or something, and we were the only ones there. My midwife had set us up in the same room. She was there with her offsider who was at my first birth. So that was really nice to see her again. Um, and there were positives to the thing, but it was just like the previous time when we had my eldest, we'd got there at like 11:30 in the morning, and by 3:30 he was born, and
Yeah.
so it was all quite quick. Whereas we got there this time at like 4 p.m. I want to say around that time after labouring at home all day and walking around on the farm and having it ramp up and then school slow down. Anyway, we got there and she did a vaginal examination to see how dilated I was. And she was like, oh, you're at about a 4. And I was like, okay, so it's happening. And she was like, yeah, it's happening. But again, it was like we'd get in the shower for pain relief and then my contractions would slow down or stop. And then so we'd move into all these different positions. And I honestly was in like 8 or 9 different positions. Whereas with my eldest, I'd got there, I'd been in the room walking around for a bit, it had got really intense. They'd run the bath, I'd got in the bath, and then that had been kind of where I stayed. And then he was born and it was all done.
Yeah.
But yeah, with him it was like everything felt like so different. And it was so intense. And like I was crying a lot through my whole birth.
Yeah.
And like wet my pants at one point, and I was like devastated at the fact that I'd wet myself. I was like, this is so embarrassing. And Kelly was like, are you kidding? I've seen your vagina. This is not embarrassing. This is part of the parcel. Just don't worry about it. We'll clean it up. It's fine. But anyway, so it got to about, must have got to about 9:30, and I could see the midwives like looking at each other like, we've been here for 5 hours now. Like, we were expecting this to be done because Jess, the other midwife, had been at my first birth. And she was like, this is so different to what she was like last time. And so they were like, I think we should probably do a secondary examination just to see how we're progressing, see what we can feel. And I was like, by that point, I was like, just do anything, just please, just
Yeah.
this is because it was so, because occasionally the contractions would be all over each other and then they'd stop. And it was just intense. But anyway, so they did an examination and they were like, oh, you're still at 7 centimeters. Um, but she's like, I can feel his head feels like it's stuck. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was like, I think we might have to, if it's still like this in the next 10 minutes, we're going to have to transfer. The hospital was 5 minutes away, so that wasn't a stressful situation. But then Jess, the second midwife, was like, do you want me to just give you a second opinion? Can I see what I can feel? And I was like, yeah, sure. Because I think she could see how panicked I looked at the
Yeah.
fact of this baby potentially being stuck. And so she examined as well, and she was like, oh no, I can feel baby's head and I can feel that it's stuck on the pelvis, but I can also feel the waters. So she's like, if I break the waters, I have a feeling that he'll have the room he needs to move down. And I was like, just do whatever. So it was like, it was the most excruciating thing, having her hold his head while my body was still contracting. But she managed to break the waters, and then literally like 15 minutes later, he slid out. I've
So,
never,
oh, wait, so she was up in there holding
yeah,
his head and then doing something somewhere else and like popping the little balloon.
yeah. So she got this hook thing, and she was holding his head, and she like maneuvered it up and hooked the amniotic sac, and there was a big gush of water, which was luckily clear because they worry about there being meconium in the water if you've been labouring that long. And yeah, clear gush. And then I moved position on the bed, and
And
I had a midwife with my leg up here, and my sister was holding the other one. And all of a sudden, I had what's called fetal ejection reflex, where I didn't push him out. He literally, all of a sudden, just slid. And my midwife was going, don't push, don't push. And I was like, I'm not pushing, I'm not doing anything. But he just slid out. And then he was born. And it was the most like incredible relief I've ever felt in my life.
mm,
But and hearing him cry, I was like, oh my God, thank God, because I was so worried that he was shocked, like he because it had happened so quickly, and he had a lot more like, you know how they get the mucus? I don't know. For those of your listeners that haven't had babies, often when they're coming through the birth canal, the contractions are helping move all the amniotic fluid in there out of their lungs and out of their nose and stuff. And so because he came so quickly, he had lots of mucus in there still in and around places.
mm,
Um, so he sounded real horrendous for the first like 24 hours that he was alive, like he had a cold,
yeah.
and he was coughing out what looked like phlegm but was amniotic fluid. Um, so yeah, so his initiation was like so intense, and I felt so many feels around that too, because I was just like, and I actually went into a bit of a depression. Like with my first, I was so like jubilant, and even though I was like I'd torn and I was sore, and I was having trouble. I had inverted nipples, and so feeding was hard with
Mhm.
my eldest. Um, but it was nothing in comparison. Like I just felt so blessed and so grateful to have had this healthy baby and had this good experience. Whereas with my second, I had so many feels in the other direction of being like, what the hell was that? I
Yeah.
thought I could do this. Like, I needed help. Like, nothing went the way that I was planning it to go. And I had so many feels and so like, and I went back and obviously like back at home, because you can stay up to, in New Zealand, you can stay up to 48 hours in a birthing unit or in the hospital after giving birth. It's like one of the things that they offer. Um, and obviously, if you've had other complications, you can stay longer. But with with my first, I did the 48 hours and it was beautiful, and they made you meals, and the
Mm.
meals were like, but with my second, I was just so, after having such a like traumatic for me, like in the grand scheme of things, I know that I had no real birth trauma. Like I had a healthy baby
Yeah.
and, minimal intervention aside from the waters breaking. But yeah, I just felt so many things about it. And it took me a long time. I went into a bit of a depression, and because it was, you get home and you're balancing having this toddler who wants you and this newborn who needs things, and it's relearning the breastfeeding again and relearning what it feels like in your body to be sleep deprived. And
Mm.
like, because I don't know if you were the same, Liz, but for the first maybe 24 hours after all of my kids were born, I didn't sleep. Like, you think I'm so exhausted I should be able to sleep, but my adrenaline was like through the roof, and every sniffle that my second was making, especially, I was like on high alert, because I was like, I hope he's okay.
Yeah.
But I knew that he had more fluid than my eldest had. But so yeah, and then it was just an intense period after he was born too, because no one could come and visit us, and so we
Oh,
didn't have the same support. Um,
no.
I can say this now that we're not going to get in trouble, but my mum broke lockdown protocols once, and my sister-in-law did too, because my partner was so scared, because I was just not coping.
Yeah.
Like I was just crying all the time, and he's like, so he actually rang my mum and was like, I don't know what to do. I think you need to come and see Jess, because I can't work out how to help her, because he was doing what he could, because obviously he was off work at the time because of COVID. So he was taking my son out, my elder son out on the farm and doing things with him, and he thought that that's what he could do to help, was keep the oldest one occupied. But really, I think I needed the same level of care that I had with my first,
Yeah.
but I didn't get it because of the COVID situation. Um, and it really makes a difference. And like I think this was my first big awakening about like how important it is to hold new mums. And
Yeah.
it's not just after the birth. Often it's still checking in like 4 to 6 months later, when, because babies go through sleep regressions, and there's different periods that are hard, and like there's just not, especially once you've had more than one child, they're just like, oh, you've got this. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, no, it's integrating and learning how to manage multiple children and cover multiple children's needs at once, and still find a way to meet your own needs.
Yeah.
And like, especially since my boys have got older, I've realized a lot of the times that I maybe react in ways that I don't want to, or like are not my parenting ideal or whatever, it all comes from a place of not having a need met, like being hungry or being tired or needing
Yeah.
to go to the toilet, or, and because you hold on to things for so long, because you're like, oh, I'll just change the snappy, or oh, he just needs some toast made, so I'll just make this toast. And then all of a sudden it's like half an hour later and you still haven't gone to the toilet,
Yeah.
like, because your kids' needs are always quite immediate and they feel urgent, like, and you're like, as soon as I do this, then I can do this. But then it becomes later and later, and then all of a sudden it's 4 o'clock and you still haven't got dressed.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's where the mental stuff can kind of get to you about within the trenches and all the things, because you just all of a sudden are like, oh my God, I just forgot myself and I'm not a person. I definitely
yeah,
had just got out of the saga of like I don't feel like a person. I'm just
yeah,
this not even a robot. I'm just this like thing floating around that's feeding something else. And
yeah,
where do I exist in this?
yeah. And like I can tell you from my experience that I've had that with each child, and with each child, I've been a different person afterwards. So,
Yeah.
like the Jess that was pre kids, I don't really have many links to her anymore.
Yeah.
Like I've got interests that are still the same, like loving reading and um liking walking and going out with my family and spending time together and all that sort of stuff. But the version of me has changed
Mm.
3 times now because you have to and you adapt and each child brings something out in you that you didn't have before and all that sort of stuff.
It's like
Um
so I've got goosebumps because it's just I feel that so much and it's not like a oh it's so beautiful. It's equally as beautiful as I can like just feel how hard,
yeah,
like things get to be true at the one time, right? It just
yeah,
you get to feel like the absolute biggest failure of all time and like everything you're doing everything wrong. And then at the same time you get to feel like, oh my God, I'm doing it. I'm here, I'm
yeah,
doing things, I'm a superhero.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's where I'm really at the moment too. The duality of life is massive in my life. Like I've been doing this for 6 years now.
Mm.
And honestly, there is so many times, like I still have days that I'm like, I'm failing at this. I'm not doing well. I'm failing my kids. My kids are going to grow up with trauma because of how much I've been yelling recently.
Yeah.
And like, because I've got boys and they don't really listen and until mum loses her shit. And that's not my ideal, but it
Yeah.
is what happens sometimes.
Yeah.
But then you also have days that you're like, how grateful I am that this is my life. I wouldn't be doing anything else. There is nowhere else I'd rather be. I'm so lucky that I've got these kids. I love them so much. How amazing. I'm doing such a good job. Like I've managed to do this, this, and this today. Like, but we live in, I guess, such a society where you feel like you can feel like your worth is based on your productive output, like
Yeah.
what you can get done in a day, or like how well behaved your kids are, or whether
Yeah.
they talk back to you or they don't talk back to you, or whatever. Which, like, it's so like arcane if you think about it. Like,
Yeah.
every experience is different, every child is going to be different. Like, I have days that my kids listen to me and days that they don't. I have days that they push back a lot and days that they don't. And like, yeah, it's just it's motherhood is such a trip,
Oh
such a trip.
God. It's
And
so
like,
wild. So wild. And I don't, yeah, I'm only just kind of like out in the phase of like I'm figuring out who I am again because I was just like on this lost
mhm,
cloud. And yeah, it's every day is like learning something new, either about myself or about my baby or about
yeah,
like what I'm doing and figuring out yeah, it's tiresome.
which is totally what my life is too. And like my
Mm.
youngest is 18 months old now,
Yeah,
and I'm only just starting to feel like a self again, and
yeah,
not just like their mother. Um, so with some kids it takes longer.
yeah,
Like with my second, I was back at work. I had to go back to work a little bit earlier. I was back at work when he was 10 months old, but he was able to be in the classroom with me because I worked in a tots and toddlers centre. Um, but yeah, so with him, it felt my whole experience was so different. And then, but once I was back at work, I started feeling like myself again because I was like, okay, there's this part of my life that I'm now doing again, like teaching children and supporting mums. And like once you've had kids and you've had kids in like kindy and daycare and stuff, you realize how important it is to be held by the kayako within the centre, the teachers within the centre, because it's such a big thing to trust other people with your kids.
mm,
And so like going back to work after him, I had this new understanding of how important it is to make sure that the mum's supported. And so that became a big thing for me with my second. And
yeah,
I felt like a person really early. But yeah, even though I had like an amazing birth with my third, it's taken me 18 months to start feeling like myself again because life has been so like intense with managing everyone's different needs.
yeah,
Um, that's been the hardest thing. Like it's not hard to love your kids. but it's hard to like manage everyone's needs and then manage your own needs in amongst it while still running a house and like being an adult and a human.
I love how you in your like bio that you sent me you called yourself the coordinator of chaos, and I feel like that just so eloquently describes what like I can imagine life with three children and a partner and
Yeah.
being a walnut life to be like.
Yes. Yeah. And so like, because even like my birth with my third, my pregnancy was sweet as, and then my birth was like incredible. And this is probably actually the scariest thing that I've ever done. We live an hour away from the hospital,
Mm.
and I decided to have a home birth because I was like, even though I'd had an awful experience with my second, the thought of working out when to leave the house and getting people to come and look after my elder two, I was just like, that felt too hard for me. So I was like, I talked to a midwife up here, found her, loved her, it was great. Explained that I'd had two births at the birthing centre. One that was beautiful, one was hard. And I explained sort of, she helped me unpack a lot of my fears around like whether I'd be able to handle what happened before at home and all that sort of stuff. And she was like, I think we can, I'm pretty sure we can do it. She's like, I've done it before with people with this and this and this. And I was like, okay. And so she really empowered me. And she was like, you're capable of it. You've had two births before. You're a good candidate for home birth. She's like, worst comes to worst, we transfer. And she's like, as soon as I get there, if I work out that it's not going the way it should be, we can transfer, you know. So she put me at ease and she put my partner at ease because my partner was like, oh, I don't know about this. Um, but anyway, in the end, we had the most beautiful experience. But again, like house was full of people. We had my mother-in-law living with us. My mum and my sister had come up for the weekend. They were hoping because it was my mum's 50th, and
Wow.
the couple of days before he was due on my mum's 50th. And so she was just assuming that by the time she'd had her 50th and all that, while my sister was over from Australia, that he would have been born. And so she was hoping that she'd be visiting me a few days postpartum and able to do like all the loving stuff that she didn't get to do with my second. And so she turned up with bags of food and stuff, and I'm still very heavily pregnant.
Wow.
Um, but the night that they got there is the night that I gave birth. It all happened like so quickly and beautifully. Like it was crazy. It was such a nice note to potentially end on, um, because it was so different from my second. I was like, oh my God, this is like next level. Um, my contractions started ramping up about 10 o'clock, and then he was born by 1:51 in the morning in
Wow.
our living room in a birthing pool with the cat watching and like all of these people. But it was like so chill and it was so nice to be in your own space. And like I had music playing and like a salt lamp and like candles, and it was like such a beautiful birth. And it was so nice actually to be held postpartum. Like our house was chaos. Like there was kids yelling and running around, and my eldest actually woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning because he heard his brother crying on like while we were getting him weighed and stuff. And
I
our lounge
cried.
oh, honestly, this is what made me cry. The whole birth was fine, and then as soon as he came out and saw his baby brother, I was just like, "Whoa." He held his baby brother when he was like just born,
Oh,
and yeah, so it was like such a healing experience
yeah.
after having a birth that didn't go the way that I planned it to, and a healing postpartum too. Like because there was other adults in the house, I was able to go back, like I was able to rest when I wanted to rest
Yeah.
and take it slowly because I had my mother-in-law helping with like the running of the house and cooking meals and making snacks and all that sort of stuff. So I highly recommend having like another adult, like a family member, if you can, for at least a week after giving birth, because it makes like, especially if you've got older kids, it makes such a difference.
It's just like that thing of the village thing, eh? Like
Yes.
having someone like especially a close family member if you're lucky enough to like have that um be in the actual house even though it feels like when you're not pregnant or when you're not like
Yeah.
kids, it feels like, oh, having another grown up in the house is like kind of annoying. But
Yeah.
when you're in that vulnerable time of like the trenches are starting, the hormones are hormoning, and you're not sleeping, it's like the most valuable thing ever to just get that support.
Yeah.
Is having to try and do it on your own.
Yeah.
Like it, there's
Especially if
just
your
accept
partner had
it,
to go
just
back to
accept.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just like, it was crazy looking back, but I was so grateful because, my partner went back to work within a few days of our youngest being born because, bills to pay and,
Yeah.
work that needs doing. Um, but yeah, if you can get that support, it's so valuable. And
Um,
like,
Jess, I've got a question about the newborn trenches. With with your first one, obviously, like then you learned what the trenches actually were.
yeah,
Does that version of trench change from second to third as well? Like, are you like, okay, I
yeah.
know I'm gonna have this hard bit. Like, is it easier or
Well, I guess you kind of know what to expect.
yeah,
Like, I guess, especially with my last one, I made sure that in the weeks leading up that I was prepared in terms of making sure that there were snacks in the cupboard. So like every shot, I think for the last like 6 weeks before I gave birth, I was just adding extra bits and pieces to my normal weekly shop and just like setting them aside into a part of the pantry because I knew that I'd need to the best way to prepare when you've got multiple kids or like toddlers or
yeah,
whatever is making sure that there's things that you can grab when you're one-handed.
yeah,
Because the amount of time that I spent like with my baby attached and trying to like get the older kids snacks, like that became my saving grace.
yeah,
So I guess the trench has just changed each time. Like in your body, you have muscle memory. Like your body remembers the first couple of days are shocking each time, but the trenches do change and feel a little bit easier to manage because you know what to expect. You know that you're going to have this hard period and that it's slowly going to get easier.
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. The trenches do trench each time though.
yeah.
And
They
there's different parts that you find difficult each time, like different things that I guess are harder to deal with each time. Like with my third, the sleep deprivation, holy hecker, that absolutely killed me. With
yeah,
my second, like I didn't find it as hard. Like it's tiring, of course, and you have like moments that you're like, what am I doing?
yeah,
And you find things in the fridge that you're like, what the hell is the remote doing in the fridge?
yeah,
Things like that. But with my third, it was just like, it was so much harder to wake up when he was crying. Like it was almost like an alarm sometimes that you were like, oh yeah, just 2 more minutes. Maybe if I just 30 seconds, just maybe he'll stop crying, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, each time it's different. With each child, there's different things that I've found being triggering or hard.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
God. So many like so many questions, but I want to hear a little bit about like the decision to do the homeschooling and yeah, your like rural living and things like that. Like where did this come from, the decision to homeschool, and how does it feel, and is it again that, like fuck it's hard, but then also like I feel really empowered and really,
Yeah. 100%. So yeah, the decision to homeschool, my partner had from the start, like when we first started talking about having kids, he was like, look, I hated school. You're a teacher. He's like, I would love us to work towards perhaps having that as an option
Yeah.
when we have kids. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that, man. I'm ECE trained. I don't know what it like how you go about teaching your child, like how to teach them to read, and it's a lot of pressure. Is a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But the decision came about. We moved to the small town. Um, we have a school literally around the corner from us, a little country school. So around the time that my son turned 5, we had my nephew and my sister-in-law living with us because they'd relocated. So my partner's sister and mum have both, since we've moved up here, relocated to the Hawke's Bay to be closer to us, um, to create that sort of village feeling, I
Yeah.
guess. So yeah, my sister-in-law and my nephew were living with us around the time that my eldest turned 5, and my nephew was going to the local school, because my sister-in-law had to go back to work, and so, and I wasn't really, because I just had my third baby like 6 months prior. I wasn't really in the space of being like, yes, I can have 4 boys home with me all the time. I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
there's no way, no how. So we made the decision to put them in at the start of term 1 last year. And knowing that my son is really not that way inclined. Like, he's a outside, climb trees, ride his bike, build things in the sandcastle. He's a real active kid. He struggles to be inside. He's not had any interest really in like the bookworky sort of stuff. Like, my nephew is a different kid completely. Like, he was drawing amazing pictures, and like he'll sit down and draw for like an hour or 2 hours when he was like 4.5, and really into reading and like things that you sit down and potter at, tinker at. So just two different learners, whereas my eldest is a really physical, practical yarner who likes talking to people and doing things. And um anyway, they went to school together for the first 6 months of last year. And the first term, my son loved it. Loved the new environment, loved the fact that it was play based. Like, they've got this almost kindy set up
Yeah.
in the new entrance classroom, and he really enjoyed that. Loved the playground, loved being around other kids and all that sort of stuff. But by the second term, I could see that the wheels were falling off. He'd lost his spark, he'd lost his enthusiasm. He was telling me that he was getting in trouble because he didn't like coming in when the bell rang. He didn't understand the fact. Well, I just think he found it hard to assimilate the fact that he couldn't do what he wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, he found that really tricky to deal with. His book work was being sent home, and like there was whole sections of the book that he hadn't made an attempt at because he did, like, because the teacher wasn't forcing him, which I totally understood because I didn't want her to force him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I could see that he just wasn't getting from it what my nephew was.
Yeah.
And I was like, I could see his spirit was just struggling with the schooling. And I was like, well, by that stage, my youngest was almost 1, and I was feeling like I had a little bit more, what's the word? Control, or like I'd got myself into more of a rhythm and
Yeah.
like a bit of a flow. And I was like, well, actually, look, I'm home with a 2.5-year-old and a baby. Like, it's not going to be that big a deal if he's home with me. The main thing for us was navigating whether it was going to be an issue for my nephew because he was still living with us. Whether it was going to affect him wanting to go to school, because again, I was in the same situation where I was like, I don't want to make things difficult for him, but
Mhm.
also I don't have the capacity to be like, well, let's just leave them all at home with me,
Yeah.
because that's a lot of pressure. But anyway, so we took him end of term 2. I emailed the school and I was like, Bo, well, it was the start of term 3. I emailed the school and I was like, look, Bo has indicated that, I wasn't going to say his name, whoops, has indicated that he isn't really that keen on returning. I'm just going to give him the rest of the week to see if he changes his mind, and then we'll reassess. And they were really supportive. Like, the school that we went to have been amazing to deal with the whole transition to homeschooling. I was like, we're just going to give it a week, and we're just going to, because we loved the school holidays. Like, the weeks that he was home and the school holidays were choice. Like, we just spent days at the river and riding our bikes, and my middle son loved having his bigger brother around, and
Yeah.
like they were thick as thieves and like building together. And I found it actually, when we took him out and did our like trial homeschooling, that things got so much better for the pair of them. And by the time he'd been out of school for a few weeks, he just, like, his spark came back. He was interested in things again. He was sitting down and wanting to, like, he was asking me how to spell things and like recognizing letters and stuff. And so, yeah, we made the decision to pull him and notified the school, and then started the process of writing our exemption ready for when he turned 6. Um, And yeah, like it was tricky because, you've gone from having days where, you've got 6 hours of the day that you're only dealing with two children to trying to navigate having everyone home all the time. Um, because when they're at school, they've got lunch boxes and all that sort of stuff. And so that's snacks that you don't have to worry about for at least one child. And it takes a lot of pressure off you.
Yeah.
But I could just see that he wasn't happy. And so the decision was to, yeah, change it up and try a new thing. So we trialed it for term 3 and term 4, and then his exemption came through. And so this year is our first year officially homeschooling, but he hasn't been in school since middle of last year. But yeah, you have days, I guess, getting to the next part of your question, there's days that it feels so hard and so impossible and so like overwhelming, I guess, of because it is a lot of pressure to be fully responsible for your child's, not only like, because when you raise kids, obviously you're responsible for their like health and well-being and them growing up healthy and strong and, with all the resources that they need to be competent adults. But being in charge of their schooling as well is like a real different kettle of fish. But this is where I guess I come to my walnutting as well, because like
Mm.
it's scary. Yes, being in charge of all these things for your kids is very scary. But at the same time, it's taught me so much about myself. And like I've accessed all these resources that I didn't know I had access to. And I'm feeling really proud of myself in terms of the fact that the whole way through, from the decisions that we made while I was pregnant with him to now, we've made decisions that are in his best interests and that are reflective of what he needs and reflective of what my middle child needs and my youngest needs. So like that feels good as a parent. But yeah, you have days that it's just like, what have I done?
Yeah.
What have I done? This is hard. Man, this is hard. But like I enjoy the fact too that we have listened to him and that we've responded to his needs and that we are working through together and finding things that work for him and things that work for all of us.
Yeah.
Um, that feels really good.
And the
Yeah.
trust in your like your own personal, not even the mother's intuition, but your own personal trust in yourself to know
Yeah.
that, okay, you have to back yourself in
Yes, 100%.
everything that you do. And I found in my whole entire walnut journey actually that even pre children, that that was the hardest part, is actually backing myself. And so like,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that for you must be like on absolute fire now, and you're
Yeah.
just like, no, that's my decision, and you got to be completely there. You have to be,
Yeah.
because you're it.
Well, I
You're it
mean,
all day.
exactly. And I mean, like, I think that the main thing for me about being a walnut and being a mother and all the rest has been the biggest tool, I guess, in actually regaining that connection with my internal wisdom or my internal, like my gut feeling.
Yeah.
Because everything that I've done since becoming a mother has got me more in tune with, does this feel right for me? No, this doesn't feel right. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's been a big relearning because I think that there's a lot of things set up in society that try to disconnect us from that internal like gut feeling or that knowing. Like because there's the big thing of the underlying current of fear of like so you end up outsourcing a lot of your mana or whatever without even realizing it because you're always looking for like an adultier adult to like give you the wisdom and tell you what it is that you should be doing or you need to do or whatever, when really like we need to do more of listening to what feels right for us or what we know to be right or what works best for our situation or what works best for ourselves or our children or whatever. And often sometimes that may not be what the norm is. Like, there's been so many times that I've had people be like, you're mental for homeschooling 3 boys. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, when I was going on maternity leave with my third, because obviously I worked in a kindy centre, they were flabbergasted that I was taking all the kids out with me. They were like, you're not going to bring the older two to kindy? Like, I was like, we live 15 minutes away. The thought of driving in and out 4 times a day just to get like 4 or 5 hours of only having one child, it just didn't, it felt like it
Yeah.
didn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
I was like, there was no, and I actually, that's the biggest thing that I've loved about the homeschooling and living where we live is having the flexibility to like, we've only got 2 days a week at the moment that we have like a place that we need to be at a certain time. And it's the most incredible feeling. Like I'm so grateful for that feeling of that freedom of
Yeah.
only having 2 days a week that we've got somewhere that we need to be, at 8:30 in the morning. The rest of it is like pretty fluid. Like we can just ease into our morning and ease into our day and then be like, okay, what do we feel like doing? Or we've got this on this afternoon, or we've got to go and pick up the milk or whatever. And then we just sort of, I guess, create our days around those moments of being like, okay, well, while we're in town, we can go do the groceries or go to the library or go to the BMX track because my kids love riding their bikes, and it feels so freeing after being like growing up as like an anxious person with a bit of depression and all that sort of stuff. I've
Yeah.
now been 5 or 6 years off, 6 or 7 years off medication because I've managed to soothe my nervous system. And I mean, I still have days that my nervous system is through the
Yeah.
charts, but it's easier to manage now because, you pivot. We pivot on those days and we're like, okay, so we're not feeling good. It's a movie day. We're
Yeah.
going to have popcorn at 10 o'clock in the morning, like, and that's really cool to be able to do that. And I'm really grateful to be able to do that.
I love this. And I love the word that you used, fluid. Like
Yeah.
it sounds so delicious. Oh my God, Jess, I feel like I have 1,000 more questions. I feel like we need a part one, part two, part three, part four, like so I can just like go into detail, all the nitty-gritty about each birth and then more homeschool. Like I just have so many more questions, but I feel like this has been a really good chat to just sort of
Yeah.
like get that understanding of like what life is like for you and like how you walnut your way through literally every single day
Yeah.
and every single like child as well.
Yeah.
Is there, before I ask you token question and we kind of like wrap up, Jess, is there anything on your heart that you've felt like you haven't talked about or that you want to say?
I guess I just, yeah, really want to say because, like, I mean, I've got sisters who, like, I've got one sister who hasn't been sure if she wants kids, and another who is still quite young. But
Yeah.
I just want to say that, like, it's motherhood is the hardest thing, hands down, hardest thing you'll ever do. But it has been the single most, like, beneficial thing that I have ever done for myself, but also for my partner, for my children. Like, it's going to sound so lame, but it's been like the biggest blessing.
Yeah.
Like, so grateful to have healthy children, even though it's chaotic.
Yeah.
Like every day is chaotic. It has been the biggest blessing, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you, yeah, you like it just gives life meaning, right?
Yeah.
Like so different. But yeah, I think that's all I've got to say.
Oh, like getting emotional again. So yeah, so beautiful. I agree with you. It's like so like again that two things duality.
Yeah.
It's like so hard and disgusting sometimes, and then it's like also just so lovely and nourishing and
Yeah. But
filling,
especially like
fulfilling.
for me, like I've got childhood trauma and I've got triggers and all the rest. And it's working out, it's like the duality too of working out how to heal those parts of yourself that you know you need to work on while still raising this other child and trying not to like do things that you're like might affect you later in life
Yeah.
because you've got that in the back of your head. You're like, I hope that I've made the right decision with this and that it's not gonna like you're not gonna turn up at like 18 and be like, remember when you used to yell all the time? Like,
Yeah.
it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But yeah, yes, that's so.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, I ask all of the guests on the podcast, Jess, what does being a walnut mean to you?
So yeah, being a walnut to me obviously is just um kind of going against the grain, I guess, for me. It's just doing things that feel right and working out, I guess, ways to live an authentic life and a life that feels good. I want to live a life that I enjoy, and that is going to mean making decisions that other people potentially wouldn't make um, sometimes. And but I think at the end of the day, we all just want to get to the end of our life and know that we lived truly and we had love and we learned a lot and like I think that comes down to it for me is just finding ways to live authentically and get back to little Jess
Yeah.
and the person that like rediscover, I guess, the self inside me, and do things that are right for her as well as right for our family. Yeah.
Getting emotional because it's so deep. I know it's like words, but it's so deep. Thank you so much, Jess. It's like a really
Thank
lovely
you for having
of
me.
being a walnut, honestly. Like, yeah, really, really nice. Now if there's a walnut listening that's like, oh my God, I want to like know more about Jess and things, is there a place where walnuts can like connect with you, or are you completely off grid? What are we feeling?
I'm so at the moment I am relatively off grid. I've got an Instagram. My Instagram is currently private, but
Yeah.
I am toying with the idea of I've been trying to work out how to set up a second page.
Yeah.
Because I part of the things that I like doing is I love journaling and writing musings on motherhood and all that sort of stuff. So I have been toying with the idea of setting up a separate page and maybe doing a Patreon or something for my writing, but I can't work out how to do it. I don't know how to set up a secondary page. I get into Instagram and I'm like trying to work out how to set up a second page and I'm like, it gets overwhelming and I'm just like, oh no, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And so, but yes, I am in the process of working it out,
Okay.
working out a way that people can get in contact.
Perfect. When that does happen, I will put it in the show notes and share with the Walnuts who listened to this
Oh,
episode. So Walnut, thank you very much for listening and for being here and for your time, of course. If you've got any questions, send them through to me so I can send them to Jess. Or I feel like we do need a part two. I don't know. Maybe when you get your Instagram up and running, your second
yes,
one, we can chat all about that and talk about your words and your musings and when a few more creations are out in the world, that would be pretty cool. But Jess,
sounds
thank
good.
you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed hearing all about your story. Thank you for being brave enough to come and chat with me about you today. Like I know it's not an easy thing. So yeah, I just really, really appreciate it and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Have a happy Walnut Wednesday and Walnut, I'll talk to you next week. Bye.